When you say nation, you talk about land. Our land is Africa. That's undeniable. This land is not our land.
That what Frantz Fanon's theory, psychological theory, is that we're in a post-colonial psychology. And what he calls that is an auto-destructional stage, which is the oppressor will oppress for so long that the oppressed no longer have to be physically oppressed. They do it to themselves automatically.
I'm black. Do you hear me, man? Do you understand? I am black. I'm a nigga. You understand me? I was born black, I live black, and I'm gonna die probably because I'm black. Because some cracker that knows I'm black better than you, nigga, is probably gonna put a bullet in the back of my head.
Hey man, it's like this, man. It's like, you know, it's like it's revolution time, man. There's no questions asked. Revolution is here. You know what I'm saying? We the youth, we the young. It's time for us to break loose, you know? We don't have no freedom, no rights, man. We slaves right now. Everybody's still a slave. That's what they told us today. In other words, you still a slave. No matter how much money you got, you still ain't shit. So, you know, it's on, just like that. Just like
are really ready and willing to pay the price that is necessary for freedom. Our people will always be walking around here second-class citizens, or what you call 20th century slaves.
What price are you talking about, sir?
The price of freedom is death.
What's the figure?
I mean, what are you in this for? You want power, you want revenge, you know? What is it?
It's simple, Willie. I just want to be free.
Hey, peace, and Black power, African power. Appreciate you all for tuning in, tapping into another Blueprint for Black Power study session. I am Akimbo Ojore of We Charge Colonialism. We Charge Colonialism is a Pan-African anti-colonial think tank media platform. And we're doing the work. You know, we're doing the work to counter the colonial media, colonial institutions that continue to perpetuate this relationship, this colonial relationship that Africans have with the European power structures. So this is our job, man. We'd like to have these discussions. This particular discussion that we're having tonight is on Dr. Amos Wilson's Blueprint for Black Power, who is giving us the keys, you know, giving us the blueprint to overturning this relationship and attaining power as Black people. Because when we talk about Black power, which should be the only thing that we're talking about having the control over the institutions, the central institutions in our lives that can help sustain our existence on this planet. And we, for the last 500, 600 years, Black people have been, those institutions have been under the control and domination of a foreign power. So how do we get that back? This book is one of the texts that we can use to show us the path to doing that. Again, I'm Akimbo Ojore. Appreciate you all for tapping in. Make sure you like and share this podcast. Subscribe to the channel, We Charge Colonialism, if you're not already subscribed. Before we get into the text too, I want to say rest in power to Sekou Odinga. You probably hear me say that a lot. You know, rest in power, who transitioned yesterday. Was it yesterday? No, 2 days ago. And so I think it's important for us to uplift this freedom fighter, someone who spent over 3 decades behind the wall as a political prisoner, fighting for liberation, for the liberation of African people around the world, here in the United States and around the world. So I think it's someone we need to acknowledge, someone that we need to uplift. And I think, you know, Sekou Odinga symbolizes resistance to colonialism, and so many lessons that can be learned from him. You know, what it means to be a freedom fighter, what it means to be a revolutionary. And he had the type of thinking that we all have to develop, because once you become, and I'll speak more on this tonight in chapter 4 of the text, Consciousness and Power. Once you develop a certain level of consciousness, you'll be able to see things a whole lot clearer, and you'll be able to develop the proper solutions to our problem. But what has happened is our consciousness is being suppressed by the enemy, because they want us to think in a particular way, a way of thinking that aligns with the objectives and goals of Europeans and white people. And as long as we all share the same objective and goals, and there may be some divergence, but if we all share the same objectives, for example, in America, we all look at ourselves as Americans, and we all have these objectives to want to be equal under the Constitution. This is something that we are sharing with others that are part of the state, and we're all striving for the same thing. And this is what they want. But when you diverge from that and you come to a level of consciousness where you say, hey, I want a nation of my own, that's a different level of consciousness, right? But how do we get to that point when we start thinking like that? We have to be able to see the world in a different way. We have to be able to see our relationships in a different way than we're seeing them right now. Oh, but I'll get more into that later. So tomorrow, today is the 14th, January the 14th. Tomorrow is January 15th. It's going to be Martin Luther King Day. So I'm pretty sure there's going to be a lot of events, a lot of things going on to uplift Dr. Martin Luther King. And I think, I think we should study King and learn from King, and also, critique King. Though I do not agree with his position and his objectives and goals, I feel like King was going in a direction, closer to the thinking of a revolutionary. And I think because some of his thoughts went outside of the box of what the dominant culture wanted, that was the reason why he was killed, because he began to, maybe not everything, but he began to say some things that did not align with the power structure. And at that time in the 60s, particularly in the 60s, you had a lot of people who were doing that. That cost the life of a lot of people. A lot of people died, and a lot of people were incarcerated as a result, became political prisoners as a result of that. Also want to uplift Patrice Lumumba, who was assassinated on January the 17th. So that anniversary is coming up, and we should also uplift Patrice Lumumba. I think we should uplift Prentice Bunchy Carter and John Huggins, who also lost their lives, were assassinated on January the 17th, which was a major blow to the Black Panther Party here in the U.S. So these are some other people I think we should look at and study. But I just wanted to uplift them. I don't want to take up too much more time. I want to get into this text. Let me make sure. Also, I'll be pulling up the text on the screen when I go through certain sections of this book. It's a lot. I'm going to go through chapter 3 and chapter 4, right? And I'm going to highlight some things. Chapter 3, book course blueprint. This is first copy I brought. I got a fresh copy of this text too, because this one is falling. You can see falling apart, man. That's how you know I'm doing my work in this book. I had this for years. Whole book highlighted. I probably can't see. Got the sunshine. But yeah, I'm practicing what I preach. I'm practicing what I preach, man. So, I'm gonna start from chapter 3. There's a few things that I highlighted in here that I want to talk about. But chapter 3 is social and cultural origins of power, and he starts the chapter off with speaking about culture and power and culture. Let me pull it up on the screen for you. Yeah, so social and cultural origins of power. And I think this is a, very, chapter 4, I think is probably one of the most important chapters of the book. Chapter 3 is very important too, because we're really getting to like the fundamentally what we need to do to be able to behave in a way or make the decisions and take the actions that are necessary for us to attain power. So when we talk about consciousness, a certain awareness and then a certain way of thinking that we need to adopt, and we need to also begin to develop a certain type of culture, which is going to reinforce the behaviors that's needed to attain power. So let me read some of this right here. Culture and power. We say social power is situated and that is embedded in a broader social network or a social field. Social power is generated by the social alignment or relative positioning of individuals within groups and alignment and positions of groups vis-a-vis each other within large social organizations, societies, cultures, nations, and various coalitions or alliances in order to achieve mutually desired ends, right? And when I'm going to make an analysis of what's being said, I want to give like some real life examples to make it even clearer. But I want to think, when we're talking about social power, and he's saying it's situated, like all groups are going to exercise power, but the power that's being exercised, or the group, let's take African Americans in the United States, that power is weak relative to other groups that are exercising power. But there's a relationship, there's a network, that there's still, as far as the institutions, we have a culture, which is an institution in itself, and other institutions within the society are all connected, and they're networking, they're working together towards a particular goal. The United States, so you have the United States as the largest superstructure, but within the United States, you have all of these different institutions, and then it could be breaking down to the individual. But I said family, right? And in the next section, he'll talk about family. But the family also represents an institution that's situated within that network. So all of these groups and institutions are working together, but some groups have more power than others, right? And some groups are able to influence, right, other groups to behave in a particular way to help advance their interests. And this is what the United States has been able to do. This is what Americans, and the way that I'm going to speak my mind, I guess, right? So, Americans and African people are completely different groups of people. And I know that you have people who consider themselves African American or Black American who identify themselves with the oppressor. And that's the reality, right? Technically, I would be, not technically, I'm sorry, but many would consider me an African American based on my background being in the United States, my lineage and so forth, right? But I don't identify as such. And when I go further into this discussion, it'll become clear why. But what happens is the Americans who set up this country, who were colonized by the British, and then were able to free themselves from the British and set up the United States of America, they were able at some point to get the enslaved and colonized Africans and other groups as well to begin to identify themselves with the oppressor. And if they're able to do that, then the goals, the values, all of that is going to be shared. So we begin to share the same values, the same goals and objectives as the oppressor. And all of this does is help them advance their interests. Because relatively, like where we're situated at in the power network, we're situated at the at the lower echelons of the, I guess you could say the power, the social ladder within this system. So it doesn't benefit us to identify ourselves with the oppressor or to integrate ourselves within the oppressive system. So let me continue on. There's another. I'm going to read this part right here where it says one of the most important contexts in which the alignment of individuals and groups is utilized to generate and exercise social power is that of culture. Culture is a type of power system which includes all of its members in the various groups and institutions which constitute it. A society or culture as a power system may be subdivided into a number of smaller and smaller power systems nested within or organically related to one another. The overall power of a culture or society operationally emerges from these smaller power systems, which may include familial, kinship, communal, regional, and other types of social and institutional organizations. So just keep in mind, with that being said, when it comes to what Black people have to do, right, within this system, one way to break down the system, right, and empower yourselves is to stop following, aligning yourself with the oppressor and following the guidelines or the rules of the oppressor. That's one way. Once you break down, as you see, everything is a network. Everything is connected. So what happens if something in the network stops working? There's going to be a kink. It's going to begin to break down, right? And so as Black people under the system, African people under this political economy, once we start directing our energy and our labor towards building up our own nation, that's just going to weaken the power structure, right? And they're going to resist. They have been resisting. Every time we resist and try to do something different, what they do, they resist. There's this counterinsurgency, and they begin to attack our leadership and our movement, right? And what happens is those people within our communities, they help undermine the movement by aligning themselves with the oppressor, right? So they get these people with the, I don't like calling names, but you have the neo-colonialists, and you have what Malcolm called the Uncle Toms, and you have the Sambos. I don't like using these terms because at the end of the day, as African people, we have a lot of sick people, a lot of misguided people, right? And again, it goes back to consciousness. What happens to a child who is born into a world that's dominated by Europeans or white people, who is constantly overwhelming them with images of negative images of themselves, stereotypes, constantly miseducating them, indoctrinating them to the point where they begin to see the world through the lens of the oppressor and the colonized, and not their African selves. So this is what happens, and it's not. I'm not sitting here trying to make an excuse. We still have to do what we have to do. Resist those within our community who are undermining our movement, right, and is working with the oppressor. But we have to understand that they are victims of colonialism as well. And if we can, work with them and get them and be able to raise their consciousness, because they are potential. It's like the Matrix, right? In the Matrix, you go in, and even though they can potentially be agents, these are people, if we wake up, they could be, they can free themselves from the Matrix and be a part of the movement, the revolutionary movement, because revolution is the objective. So, part of this. Move over here to family as a power system. Family as a power system. Again, like this goes back to this network, and this is sort of the there's different levels of institutions and organizations. To the smaller different units. One of the smallest units that we have within this network is the family. So with that being said, just think about the European has historically had to attack the family and had to control the family structure. And so in this same chapter, Dr. Wilson, he talks about the destruction of the Black family. I'll go into that in a minute. But let me scroll down here. He says the family is a system where power is customarily and legally exercised, where its members are not only related by kinship ties, but by blood and shared history, but related to each other in terms of membership, rights, duties, behavioral expectations, and authority. The character and personality of individual family members, especially as young, are developed, shaped, and continuously influenced by the organization and exercise of power and authority inside and outside the family unit. Consequently, the family as a power system markedly influences its members, particularly its young's attitudes toward and relationships to power and authority, both within and without the family. Thus, there is important continuity between the nature of power, its quantity, and quality in organization within the family, and the nature of social and power relations between family and its physical and social environment, including other families and institutions, which together constitute a larger social system, such as a clan, tribe, nation, or culture. Hence, effective nature of power generated and exercised by a culture is intimately and reciprocally related to and dependent on the effective nature of power generated by its family and other subcultural units. Generally, the power generated by a culture derives from the structured coalescence of interdependent family kinship groups, clans, and tribes for mutual defense against outsiders and other mutually beneficial outcomes. This coalescence of subcultural social units is usually organized and motivated by a mutually recognized leadership or government establishment. This establishment usually fulfills its responsibilities through the creation, issuance, and enforcement of policies. At this level of organization, a culture may be defined as a political organization, which exercises political power in its defense, economic and social interests as a whole, and in the interests of its subcultural group and individual members. As Dodd contends, true political power organizations begin with the development of power relationships between family and kinship groups. And he goes on to state, I won't read this part right here, but I think, it's important. Like, one thing that we should take from what's being said here is this understanding of the importance or the significance, of the family in developing Black power, right? Or developing a nation of our own, and resisting the domination of Black people. Like, within the family itself represents a exercises social power. It represents the institution within the superstructure, and it has to work the superstructure. Talking about the colony, the European political economy, right? That's only able to operate as long as it has control and is able to influence or dictate the family structure. Whether the family and the, as far as like the roles, the status, the roles of the family. What is the role and the status of the man, the woman? They have been able to dictate these things, the children, right? Under slavery, they had complete control, right? Under colonialism, they had complete control. But one thing to keep in mind, whoever controls the economy can influence the roles of the family. And within the family, those roles that are designated, whether the family is deciding what those roles are, or that influence or determination is coming from the outside, it's going to be determined by the economy. And because the European has been able to dominate the economy, of course, under slavery and colonialism, and under this new form of colonialism, the Black family structure has been, to a large degree, influenced by European domination. And that's the difference. He talks about the difference between the Black family and the white family. The Black family has historically, for the last 6 centuries has been shaped by the European culture. And so, it's important to develop a new culture and identity. And he talks about that. So right here, when he's speaking about Black American culture and identity, he's really going to get into how, and it's kind of the theme of this chapter, how European culture has to a significant degree influenced African culture, whether we have agency, or not. We can have that debate. But I think, African people have been resilient. They have been able to exercise agency. But the agency that we have exercised under colonial domination has been to a significant degree influenced by the European. In the American context, for example, why would a group of people who was enslaved with agency decide to integrate into the system of their oppressor and exploiter? Why would that be a decision? If you have agency, why would you use your agency to decide to be one with a people who have historically committed genocide against you, have brutalized you, and as you're making the decision and taking the action to be a part of this same system, they're resisting that integration. They're killing you for trying to integrate into that system. So we could talk agency all day, of our people and feel good about that, but we can't feel good about the decision that was made to be a part of this system. And so this goes back to consciousness. The consciousness of Black people under the system of slavery, maybe the only thing, those people who were in positions of power, the only thing they thought feasible thing or the best decision to be made was to be a part of this system. Why? Because the European promotes the system of colonial capitalism like it's the greatest system that ever existed on the planet Earth. There's not going to be there isn't any other alternative to it. And that African people were backward. So, of course, Black people were thinking that Africa, hey, that's not a decision, going back to Africa, so even though some people did make that decision. But that's not a choice, right? Because Africans are uncivilized, it's savagery over there, right? So they had to be civil. And if we do go over there, we're going over there as missionaries to try to civilize the African, right? But this is the best decision, to stay here in America and build America. And hopefully Euro-Americans will change their attitude towards us, right? Going back to, consciousness, but if you're conscious that, hey, you can have a nation of your own. In fact, even if you don't move, why not have land here and create a nation of your own and demand, after slavery, why not demand, hey, we want a nation of our own. We want land of our own, right here in the United States, if need be, right? Why couldn't that have been a decision by the leaders? Why did they think that they had to be one with the oppressor? It was because of the level of consciousness that they were at. So, even today, just think about it. How, if we were able to shift the consciousness of Black people and have them thinking, hey, you can have a nation of your own. You don't necessarily have to be a part of the United States of America, right? If we can get the same way that they think about, if you go to a person and tell them, hey, you can have your own business, why work for someone, right? You have a conversation with someone or told someone that, and, they begin to think about that. They never thought about it before, right? This is what I'm talking about, the state of consciousness. I'm kind of jumping to chapter 4, but I think it's important, might as well, because he talks about these states of consciousness. And, the state of consciousness is someone where they don't know that they can have their own business, or they don't think that it's an attainable goal. But when somebody begins to talk to them, tell them, hey, all you have to do, go ahead, get your EIN number, and they begin to break down the process of them having their own business, that person begins to see possibilities that they didn't see before, because their consciousness has been is now at a different state. It has been raised. I want to, because when I say raised, it kind of connotes that a person's level of consciousness is higher, which in some cases it is, but that's not always the case, right? Because you could be a change in your state of consciousness could be at a lower state, but anyway, so the possibilities, right, this person sees more possibilities than it had seen before. It's the same thing with a nation. If these people, if you begin to have conversation, you can have a nation of your own, right? It may be a lot more, difficult than starting your own business, but it is a possibility. And once we begin to see those possibilities, then we can begin to work towards it. Because no group of people should be able to tell you that you can't have a nation of your own, right? That's oppression. That's oppression right there. Another group of people are telling you can't have a nation of your own. That's slavery. That's colonialism, right? So they have to get the colonized to identify with the colonizer and the oppressor, to have the same objectives and goals as the oppressor. So you won't demand a nation of your own. They don't want you to see that possibility. Now, it's a little different, right, when you go to the continent of Africa and the West Indies and places where Africans represent, the dominant power. They control the power structure, but it's just a different dynamic, though, because the economy is still dominated by outsiders, right? So their consciousness has to be shifted, where they're thinking that, hey, we don't necessarily have to be dependent on Europeans. We have all the resources we need among ourselves, right? So I jumped, to be honest, I digressed a lot. But it's all connected at the end of the day. So let me just speak about Black American culture and identity. I'm gonna tie it all back in, but I hope that made some sense. Make sure I got this on the screen too. Set of designs. Yeah, I'm in the right place. So Black American culture and identity. So he goes into what is culture. I don't really want to read that part. Let me go. This part right here, I think, is very important. I'm gonna scroll down, and I'm gonna start from this part. Now listen to what Doc says right here. This is very important, and I'm gonna tie this into everything that I just spilled. As a set of designs for guiding the behavior of its members, that is, a set of guidelines for directing and regulating the behavior of its members. A culture provides standards of proper cognitive, emotional, and behavioral conduct, a set of proverbial precepts as to what reality is, and an accompanying set of rationalizations or ostensible explanations for its nature and purpose. Thus, culture, though a product of the actual lived experience of a people, the primary source of much of their daily personal and social activities, their forms of labor and its products, their celebratory and ceremonial traditions, modes of dress, art and music, language, and articulatory style, appetites, and desires, is essentially ideological in nature, based as it is on shared beliefs, customs, expectations, and values. Culture constructs definitions, meanings, and purposes. These cultural constructs are used to proactively and reactively make sure. Okay. How come I'm looking at this? Am I looking at this right? So culture constructs definitions, meanings, The culture constructs are used to proactively and reactively mold the mind, body, and spirit and behavior of the constituent members of a culture. These active constructs become the cultural and social heritage of its members of a particular culture. Hence, culture does not exist outside and independent of its human subjects. Culture is represented symbolically and operationally in the minds and characteristically mental, behavioral orientations or styles of its members, and is incarnated in the customary ways they move and use their bodies. And let me stop there for a second. Okay, yeah. This part right here, I wanted to touch on where you see and I don't even, this is strange. Y'all got to excuse me, right? Okay, it looks different. It looks different on, I'm baffled right now, so please excuse me because I copied this from the book, but why it looks different on the screen than it does in the book has me very complex, right? Very confused right now. I wish I could see what I see. So this part right here, which says is essentially ideological in nature, based as it is on shared beliefs, customs, expectations, and values. Culture constructs definitions, meanings, and purposes. These cultural constructs are used to proactively and reactively mold the mind, body, and spirit and behavior of the constituent members of the culture. So you see, like, why it's really important for us to control our culture. When our culture is influenced, in which it is and has been influenced by outsiders, right? Those people, especially when those people have a large influence on the culture, then they can have control over mind, body, and spirit, or they can influence mind, body, and spirit. So there is like this interaction that's going on. And because, I don't want to take nothing away from what we create, but it's this influence on, we're creating things within a society that's dominated by Europeans, and the things that we're creating is sort of benefiting this society in a sense, right? We're using our innovations, we're using our creativity, right, to benefit a society that is controlled by Europeans. Now, just imagine if we was able to separate ourselves and our culture, our expression, and so forth, wasn't under a system of oppression and exploitation, right? And everything that we did was for the benefit of African people, right? Nobody else could benefit from that, benefit more than us. I mean, use hip hop, for example. I feel like that hip hop is the go-to, but we can use other things as well. That white people had benefited from hip hop more than black people. And you go back to the 80s, go back to the 90s, and they began to exploit hip hop and these hip hop artists. We have people who created hip hop that are poor. You go back to the 80s and 90s, people who created hip hop, who was producing the music that represented sort of the foundation on which hip hop was born, and not just the music, everything, the culture of hip hop, right? And there were white people who were sitting in the office and were making millions and billions of dollars, and those people are still around. Some of them people are probably retired, said they sent their kids to school, so forth. And you got these people, they had to create hip hop. It was the Nas and some other people had to create like a sort of a fund to give to hip hop artists to help with their healthcare. Rakim and some other people, they have to raise resources to help these artists out. I mean, that's a serious contradiction, man. It's an example. It's a microcosm. It's a microcosm of what white people have been able to do, have done to African people since this relationship has been forged, right? We have done the work. They have acquired the wealth. accumulated the wealth. And so, so going to this, again, going back to, culture constructs definitions, meaning the purposes, cultural constructs are used. Yeah. So the point I want to make here too is, when we look at the innovation and creation, like even now, you look at hip hop and the music that's being made, a lot of the main focus, I feel, is not just about the art, it's about making money, right? And what is that? That's capitalism. And what is capitalism? Nothing but part of the culture of Europeans, something that they had forced on African people. Colonial capitalism was forced on African people. You read the history, African economy, they had to change their economies under colonialism in order to survive. So farmers had to begin to produce not just for themselves, but they had to produce for the market in order for them to acquire the resources to be able to maintain or maintain control over their land and property, because now they're competing with other people. So other individuals or groups could take over their land if they don't have the resources to maintain it. A lot of people were just forced into an economy, forced to sell their land, forced to work, in order to survive. Like, we take it for granted, today, because we were born into it. So it just seems natural to go get a job for someone else and so forth, right? The things that we do, engage in capitalism, it seems natural. But this was something that was imposed on people and was spread across the world like a virus, right? And so, again, this goes back to consciousness. Once we able to, shift our consciousness or raise our consciousness and see that this wasn't the case, this is something that was imposed on us, and it's like, okay, we need to resist this and create an alternative, something that's going to benefit us, because this relationship, everything that we do is going to benefit others. And so, our behavior, as long as the European is able to influence our culture and behaviors and so forth, the things that we do, is going to continue to benefit them. And we may have some benefits, but overall, the benefits for the European has outweighed the benefits for African people. And so another, thing, so it's Dr. Wilson, he's talking about this. He's kind of setting it up, and this is something that he does in his chapters. He kind of breaks down culture, breaks down identity. That's what he's doing here, breaking down how it operates and functions and how it's been used against us. And then he gets into the things that we really need to do to be able to overturn that. And so, one more thing that he speaks on, though, culture and social and personal identity. One other thing I should say that I want to touch on. So the cultural identity of an individual or group is the social product of a socialization process, a process in which new responses, values, perspectives, and orientations are acquired, and existing behavior repertoires of the individual or group are modified to some extent as a result of his or its subjection to direct or indirect social conditioning experiences. Cultural identity also results from the patterning of its modal thoughts, feelings, or actions at the other cultures or groups who serve as models. All right. The reader may wonder why we include cultural identity as a group phenomena as a result of a socialization process, something ordinarily used to explain the development of personal and individual identity. Can a culture be socialized? We believe it can. Of course, yes, it can, especially when this is good right here. This is good, good stuff. I'm glad we're talking about this. A distinct subcultural group is to a large extent embedded, completely dependent on control, structure, and condition by a totalitarian dominant culture. This has been our history under slavery and colonialism. This is particularly the case when the members who constitute the subculture have been uprooted and isolated from and have lost knowledge of their own original culture and been forced to adapt to the new and strange one. Black American culture, in large part, is the socialized product of historical and power relations between white and Black Americans. Consequently, Black American cultural identity, while riddled with indigenous African cultural elements, residuals, and fundaments, is still an amalgamated product of the American experience, primarily conditioned by dominant whites who do not have the best interests of Blacks in mind or at heart. Dagger quite aptly describes socialization as the most efficient and effective means of social control. It is through the socialization process that the necessary ingredients for social order are still in the personality or in the context of this discussion. The subordinate culture, the socialization of a subordinate culture, involves the inculcation of its young with values and attitudes that serve to perpetuate the dominant social system. All right, this is why The Miseducation of the Negro is such an important book by Carter G. Woodson, because he speaks to this. He speaks to this exactly. He talks about if you control the man's thinking, right? So this is what happens in the school. What's the school? School is a place where our children are being socialized, right? That is the function of the school, to socialize our children, right? So they can be good citizens. They can go out there, get a good job, be successful, go to college, get a trade, right? But once you finish school, you should be ready. You should be a good citizen and ready for the real world, right? They're preparing you for the real world, for the society. And that's what happens. But this socialization process that's taking place is a process of miseducation, in this context that we're talking about. And this is happening around the world as it pertains to African people on the continent of Africa and West Indies, whether you're going by a British system or whatever system you're going by, right? And you're learning English, and you're taking economics class and you're learning how capitalism operates, right? You get excited because you know about GDP and demand and supply, and they teach you how the system of capitalism operates, and you got your economics teacher who economics teacher who is promoting capitalism, and if you mention anything other than capitalism, right, he's going to scorn you or berate you for thinking anything any other system, economic system other than capitalism, right? And you go to these business programs and so forth. So the point is like you're inundated with Americanism and Britishism, Europeanism, and this prevents you from developing the consciousness that's needed to begin to build an alternative to the system, because there's only one thing left once you learn all of this to do, learn all these things. One thing left to do, which is to incorporate yourself into the system. How can you, learn the system? How can you get around, certain things? How can you beat the system? All of these things, but it's all about acquiring wealth, not to bring down the system, but how you can live your best life within the system. Just the Europeans don't want nothing. They wouldn't enjoy anything less than you, or more than you doing that, right? Even the corruption. I mean, corruption is embedded in the system. The system is built on corruption, right? So it's only when you get too big, right, that then it's a problem. Or if you're not paying certain people off, or you don't have certain networks, because there's those circles. But this system is corrupt to its core, right? And if anything, when you reach a certain level, they might not even incarcerate you for breaking the law. And if they do, you may get a pardon from the president or the governor, right? You destroyed hundreds of thousands of lives because of economic corruption, but you don't really do any time, right? If you do time at all, you may just get fined, or your institution to get fined, or you get sued, those sort of things, right? You need to watch that Netflix documentary, what is it called, Painkillers, right? because it talks about this corruption. The painkillers going into the opium epidemic. But these white folks who purposely, they biggest drug dealers out there, right? Who purposely allowed this drug to be sold, knowing that there was corruption. These people, the company was dissolved, but these people aren't going to do any jail time, and thousands of people, tens of thousands of people, have lost their lives. Countless people have become addicted, right? But these people are not doing any jail time, right? But this is, a different set of rules for the European than it is for the African. But yeah, what was the point I'm making here, though? So going back to, I digress again, but the socialization process. So this is what happens. Once we become socialized, our behaviors, our actions, and so forth aligns with the colonizer, aligns with the oppressor. And so the only thing that we don't want a revolution. We want reform. We want to be equal. But as Malcolm X used to say, like, who are these people who are these people that we should be wanting to be equal with, right? Our history is longer. We have, contributed so much to civilization, society. We are the foundation of everything, from the philosophy, the science. Like, we influenced it all. We've built great empires and civilizations. I don't want to go down that, that road. But who are these people that we have been fighting tooth and nail to be a part of their system, when you have scores of them who don't want to be a part of the rest, a part of humanity. You have groups of them who wants us to be a part of the system so they can continue to exploit us. There has to be a time where we come together and say, no more. It's time for us to do our own thing. But the people who were advocating for us to do this, such as the Marcus Garveys, the Malcolm X's, the Sekou Dingas, these are people they don't want us to know about. Because at the end of the day, we could talk about racism, how much they don't like us. If they really didn't like us, then why do they continue to let us be a part of the system, right? This capitalist system, this American system, any other European system. Why do they let us immigrate to their countries, right? Because they benefit from us. They're able to benefit from the relationship that they have from us. That should tell us something right there. No, we need to get away from these people, or the system of oppression and exploitation will continue to go on as it pertains to us. So there's another thing. Let me see. I've been going for almost an hour. I'm gonna have to do a part 2 to this, but let me just do this other part, the need for a new African self-identity. And I was supposed to do this a couple of times, this podcast a couple of times early in the week, but I was under the weather. I'm still not 100%, so y'all have to excuse me. That was the only reason that I had pushed it to today, Sunday. But I did not want to keep pushing this back. And appreciate everybody, too, for continuing to tap in. But what I'll do is, because I've really just been focusing on chapter 3, even though I've been speaking about consciousness. But what I'll do is I'll swing back around, do this again, and cover chapter 4. And I'm going to finish this up because there's some other things that I wanted to speak about in this chapter, but the need for a new African identity. Let me touch on this a bit. So under certain social economic circumstances, Cultural identity can become the instrument for the expression of the power of the predominant cultural system which molded it, and may also become the instrument used by the dominant culture and its members to further its survival and enhance its empowerment. Black cultural identity, even in a stratified and diffuse state, even on the individual level, is a political economy, or essentially an organization of lacks, deficiencies, interests, needs, desires, passions, tastes, ideas, motives, values, etc. The response to which on the part of blacks help to maintain or enhance the social power relations, prerogatives, and integrity of the white dominated racial status quo. So I've really been touching on this, and he just said it in the paragraph, but this is kind of the point I was getting at. In the context of white American supremacy, African Americans must ask ourselves, what is the political economy of oppressed Black culture and the various personal and social identities it produces, right? Because he talks about, I kind of glossed over this, but he talks about how culture produces social product, and one of those social products is our identity, right? And we've been constantly, this going back to the identity of African American and Black American, for example, or whether you call yourself Haitian, Jamaican, and so forth. What is the influence? We have to ask ourselves, like, what is influencing that identity, or what had influenced that identity, right? We have to question that. And then as we begin to, you'll see once you shift your consciousness and you begin to develop that alternative to the system, new identities are going to be forged, especially when you begin to forge new relationships. You know, I myself identify as African, right? And then, you know, once I begin to build with other people, there, of course, we have whole different identities, you know, various identities within our culture. And, you know, there may be various groups within that culture, and there's the overarching identity. And so even like within America, United States, you know, you have African Americans, Black Americans, right? White Americans, Mexican Americans, and so forth, these different identities. And then like the overarching identity is American, right? Everybody identifies as American. But me, that's where I draw the line, right? I look at myself as an African in America, someone who's been ancestors been enslaved and colonized by Americans. But because of the indoctrination, miseducation, and so forth, and this influence, the influence that America wanted to have and control over African people, let's get them to identify as American, right? So you have the Black Americans, African Americans here, and anybody else who wants to identify. And then, of course, the legal structure that is put in place, that's part of the culture. You know, that's institution in itself to be able to reinforce that, right? So I have to be American, you know, because that's what the law says, right? Even though it was constructed by man, you know, it's not a law of nature, right? But this is how we really, you know, we treat these things like a law of nature, and somebody will look at you crazy, you know, like myself, you know, I'm crazy for saying I'm not American. Now I'll use the legal status of being American to my advantage, right? And this is going back, let me use it, you know, another Matrix reference. Like in the Matrix, there's a scene when they go in the what was it? It's been a long time since I've seen it, but what was it called when they went to damn, it's on the tip of my son, but they were in there when the part when they had the lady in the red dress. I forgot what they called, like a construct or something of the Matrix. But when they were in there, and Morpheus was talking to Neo, and he was breaking it down how the agents, they had limitations on what they can do because they're bound by laws. He may not have said laws, but you know, I'm paraphrasing. but they're bound by rules. So there's only certain things that they can do. But Neo, once he, understands that, he'll see that, he's not bound by those laws, and he can do more. He can go outside of those boundaries. And this is what we have to do under this system, under this matrix that they created. We have to understand that, hey, they're bound by those things, but we don't have to be bound by those things. We have to begin to think outside. Now, of course, like if you break their laws, then of course, like they can arrest you and so forth, right? But that's because we don't have power. We haven't been able to organize the power to be able to say, hey, we want a nation of our own. We want to be guided or ruled by laws of our own. So it has to be done in an organized way. We have to be able to exercise power. But the point is like the consciousness of our people doesn't even see those possibilities. So we're only bound, by these laws and so forth in that sense, because we can't envision ourselves, we can't envision ourselves living outside of this matrix or outside of this society. We feel like we're a part of it. Again, we're born into it, so we can't see, the possibilities outside of sort of this box that has been created for us. So let me continue this part. So in the context of white American supremacy, African Americans must ask ourselves. So going back to this question, what is the political economy of oppressed Black culture and the various personal and social identities it produces? We must no longer, through the abuse of reality, denial, and distortion, fail to recognize that our basic identities as an oppressed people are largely socially manufactured by the white-dominated American culture and its related social practices in which we as a people are immersed. These identities are therefore incarnations and instruments of their social power and are socially designed and conditioned when activated to unwittingly serve the political economic interests of dominant white America to the detriment of subordinate Black culture. African American culture identity and behavior orientations as currently defined are functionally defined to perpetuate self-negating, self-defeating, and under certain circumstances, destructive behavior in Black Americans. The salvation, empowerment, and liberation of African peoples require an appropriate, thorough, pragmatic, cultural analysis of the deculturation and reculturation of ourselves by dominant European peoples of reactionary Black culture. Read that again, because I'm gonna leave it on this note right here. The salvation, empowerment, and liberation for African peoples require an appropriate, thorough, pragmatic, cultural analysis of the deculturation, right? Because this is what had to be done to be able to control African people. They had to deculturate us to be able to control us, right? And then reculturate us. So when we speak English, right, or practice, Christianity, when we weren't practicing Christianity, right, when we forsake our spiritual systems for Christianity, spoke English, sent our children to their schools, right, named ourselves after Europeans, these sort of things of ourselves by dominant European peoples of reactionary Black culture and their social products as represented by reactionary Black identities. We must analyze how these identities, whether considered pro-social or anti-social, function to maintain the oppressive power of whites and the subordinate powerlessness of Blacks, right? So again, asking ourselves, how does the culture that we are practicing empowers white people? How does it benefit white people? Or we can continue to lie to ourselves and say that our actions, behaviors, our thought process does not benefit them. Right? We can lie to ourselves and say that. Our salvation further requires that we perceive white supremacy as the major social, political, economic, and spiritual problem to be resolved by African peoples, that we ask and answer definitively the questions: what kind of a culture must we construct in order to overthrow white supremacy? Right? So before you go to bed at night, think about these things. What kind of culture must we construct in order to overthrow white supremacy, white domination, white cultural domination, white political, economic domination, right? How do we get, these people out of our lives, right? What kinds of social identities, relations, arrangements, alignments, institutions, values, etc., which, when actualized, will allow us to attain and protect our liberty, enhance our quality of life. What kinds of socialization practices must we institute in order to empower ourselves to become the kind of people we must become if we are to secure our right to be free? Certainly, the answers lie in the direction of the reclamation of our African identity and the reconstitution of our African-centered consciousness, supported by the commensurate African-centered cultural, social, political, and economic values, institutions, and relations. So, I'm gonna stop there. Oh, thanks for bearing with me too. Woo! I have to drink some water. But that last part I think is very important. Just really, we have to really begin to develop a culture. We have to analyze, evaluate our culture, critique it as it is, and begin to adopt the best practices to advance Black people. We can't look at the condition or position that we're in and around the world and be satisfied and think we're going to continue to do the same thing. That we have to, our practice has to be more aligned with the political economy that exists, that Europeans have created. This is the answer. This has never been the answer. We have to become better capitalists. Is this the answer? It may be the answer for a minority of Black people, but what happens is, and those Black people, there's never been the boys. He made the mistake. He thought, we would have this talented 10th that's going to come back and raise the rest of the community up. But that talented 10th, what happened is they become European-like, right? They individualize, the struggle. They individualize their pursuit, their success. What it means to be successful. Right. And forget about the community. Not saying that there wasn't people who reached back. But overall, these are people who felt that, that they were no longer beholden, they were no longer attached to the community, that they no longer had any obligation, to the community. And if, it's up to the community to think like them and to behave like them, in order for them to raise themselves up, right? And when I say them, those Black people, that minority within the Black community, they're thinking more European-like. This is why they have to live among Europeans, right? That's why they have to move and live among Europeans, because first of all, they don't even feel safe among the Black community anymore, right? So we become an enemy to that group of people. So there's this disconnect that's created. But because of racism, those white people don't even accept them, right? So now there's this fight for acceptance and to show we're a human, just like you. That's a whole nother conversation. But the important, thing, I think we have to, again, go back to, African-centered, approach, which was something that we always took, before colonialism, before European imperialism. We always took an African-centered approach. When I say African, I know at that time there were various ethnic groups, right, that took an approach, whether it was a Timothy approach, but overall, we're talking about an African approach. That's what we have to get back to. There was something here too. One last thing: what kinds of social identities, relationships, hence something. I had another thought right here that I don't want to lose. We must analyze how these identities, whether considered pro-social or anti-social, function to maintain the oppressive power of whites and the subordinate powerlessness of blacks. Our salvation further requires that we perceive white supremacy as the major social, political, economic, and spiritual problem to be resolved by African peoples, and that we ask and answer definitively the questions: what kind of culture must we construct in order to overthrow white supremacy? Man, I should have wrote that down. But one second. All right, it'll come back to me, I guess, next time. But again, when it comes to this identity, though, let's stop identifying ourselves with the Brits, the French, the Americans. You know, we need to reclaim our identity. I think that we'll be on the right path to revolution. We're not looking to reform the system. We're not looking to, you know, be a part of the system. At least we shouldn't be. And when we look at the problems that exist outside of our doors in our communities, whether it's the criminal activities that we, you know, perpetrate among ourselves, all of that is in service of white domination at the end of the day. So again, appreciate everybody for tapping in. Really not 100%, man, but you know, I'm glad I was able to at least have this discussion. You see, oh, my peoples is there. My peoples are here. Hey, peace. Yeah, I don't know how late you are, but yeah, you just tapped in. Yeah, peace to y'all in the chat. Appreciate y'all being here. I know I was supposed to do this early in the week, but I wasn't feeling too good. And I don't know if y'all hear it now, but I'm not 100%, you know, at the moment. But yeah, I think that's all I'm gonna cover for tonight. Let me see. It's cool. Yeah, that's all. I'm gonna keep it there. Appreciate y'all for tapping in. I'm gonna do a part 2 to this later on the week because I really didn't finish going through chapter 3, and I still have to touch on chapter 4. If I was 100%, I would have covered it all. But you know, look out. Make sure if this is the first time being here, subscribe to the channel so you can get some updates. And you know, y'all have a good night. All right, peace and power.